It is common political knowledge that Sweden has always been neutral. But clearly, the days of the world having a neutral Sweden are over, as Sweden is now a part of NATO. Not many folks saw this coming, but it is the reality. Before Sweden applied to be a member of NATO, it had a reputation for cooperative peacekeeping. Also, its relationship with the West and Russia was good. But right now, it appears a lot has changed. Joining NATO doesn't mean Sweden has problems with Russia. However, after Russia attacked Ukraine, it had to reconsider its neutral status. It applied for NATO membership in the same year that Russia invaded Ukraine. This application for membership just got approved. While Sweden applied to be a member of NATO in May 2022, it didn't do this alone. Finland also applied at the same time. Interestingly, Finland's application was approved a lot faster than Sweden's. It took Finland 11 months to join NATO. However, Sweden had to wait 21 months before its application was approved. Why did Sweden have to wait a long time? NATO as an organization had no issues with Sweden becoming a member. However, Turkey and Hungary were not quite sure they wanted to be in the same organization as Sweden until some conditions were met. This doesn't seem like a big deal, however, it exposed some of Sweden's weaknesses. But if you think only Sweden's weaknesses were exposed, you're wrong. This move has also exposed NATO's weakness. We will see more of this in a moment, but in the meantime, kindly like and share this video. Also, subscribe to this channel to avoid missing our other videos. Sweden's NATO membership is generally considered a game changer because of its position in world politics and even geography. However, NATO perhaps does not see it this way. So, there are lots of questions. One of them is, why did it take NATO 21 months to approve Sweden's membership? Another question is, why doesn't it seem like there is a level of strife within NATO? We will come back to these in a moment. Right now, you must understand Sweden's position in the grand scheme of things and why there is quite a degree of celebration about its NATO membership. Sweden and Russia are not allies, and in modern-day politics in Europe, it almost feels like you have to be on Russia's side or against them. This is the politics that a country like Belarus is playing. Well, Ukraine tried to stay on its own for a long time, and that has made them victims. Sweden very much understands the political landscape in which it finds itself. Regardless of this, it stayed neutral for a long time. This may have been risky, but it wasn't without reason. Sweden has always been a major force in the Baltic, and it was like a middle ground between the spread of Russia's influence and NATO's. Russia was looking to keep expanding its territory and spreading its influence. However, this was impossible because of Sweden's position. You see, one could easily expect Russia to attack Sweden. However, Russia knew that invading Sweden wasn't a solution. But why is this so? In global politics today, Russia and Sweden might not be enemies. There are a couple of reasons for this. However, that wasn't the case centuries ago. In the 17th and 18th centuries, Sweden was an empire. And beyond merely being an empire, it dominated the Baltic and controlled large territories. Due to its interest in countries around the Baltic, it had to go to war with lots of its neighbors, and Russia wasn't an exception. There were a series of wars, and soon Sweden's expansion died down, with Russia emerging victorious in this tussle for superiority. Russia emerging victorious was bad for Sweden. However, that wasn't all that happened. After becoming a major force in the region, Russia took some territories from Sweden, and those territories are modern-day Estonia, Latvia, and Finland. Although the 17th and 18th centuries were centuries of fights between Russia and Sweden, both nations lived in peace in the 19th century. With this, Sweden began its policy of neutrality towards Russia. Occasionally, however, it strategically leaned towards Russia in some matters. Sweden's neutrality towards Russia was such that it wasn't involved in the two world wars. This is even though a lot of fighting happened in the Baltic Sea. Sweden's neutrality was evident in the world wars. However, it seemed that its neutrality began getting watered down after the collapse of the Soviet Union. You see, with the collapse of the Soviet Union, some countries that were under the control of Russia gained their independence. Also, there were some significant internal crises within countries that used to be in the Soviet Union. So at this point, Russia couldn't exactly establish its dominance on global issues. While Russia was still struggling with internal issues, Sweden was already beginning to align with the West. Although it was officially neutral, it had a significant level of engagement with the West. There was a great deal of military engagement, and things even got to the point of Sweden designing their military equipment to have some form of NATO compatibility. While Sweden was technically building alliances with the West, Russia was getting reamed. Since it wasn't as powerful as the old Soviet Union, certain Baltic states took the opportunity to join NATO. Sweden could have done the same. However, it decided to stay neutral. Sweden joined NATO because it is looking to avoid becoming a victim of Russian aggression. It's easy to assume it wants to hide under the cover of NATO's umbrella, but that's not actually how things are. You see, before Sweden joined NATO, the other Baltic states that joined much earlier didn't bring a lot of military experience to the table. What they provided were sites for building military bases that could help NATO easily invade Russia if there was a need for that. Additionally, if Russia attacked and one of these states fell, it would be difficult for NATO to come to their defense. However, with Sweden in the mix, NATO occupies a vantage position geographically, so surveillance and defense just got easier for NATO. Sweden offers NATO lots of benefits. Of course, it gains a lot from joining NATO too, but there is the question. If Sweden brought a lot of benefits to NATO, why was joining so difficult? Remember, Finland, which likely doesn't offer as many benefits, was able to join about 10 months before Sweden. NATO was open to Sweden joining easily. However, Hungary and Turkey were both unwilling to let Sweden in until some terms and conditions were met. As much as these countries were free to use their veto power to decide who became part of NATO and who didn't, they had certain demands of Sweden that were unrelated to talks of Sweden joining NATO. Turkey, on the one hand, had issues with Sweden's freedom of speech, as it gave a Kurdish separatist group the power Turkey thought it didn't deserve. Speaking about what Turkey wanted from Sweden, various Turkish leaders said, if Finland and Sweden want to join a security alliance, they have to give up their support for a terror organization, PKK, and not give refuge to them. On the other hand, they also have to accept Turkish requests for the extradition of 30 terrorists, which are very specific cases. You are talking about people who have been actively fighting with Turkey for more than 40 years and killing tens of thousands of civilians in the process. Turkey is not happy about the fact that they suddenly became good guys just because they came in handy against ISIS. Ankara wants to make Sweden change its laws to be stricter on terrorism, to have a spillover effect on other Western allies, pushing them to do the same towards groups Ankara considers terrorists. That's not all. Turkey is not happy with some anti-Muslim protests in Sweden. These protests that are targeted at fighting terrorism had absolutely nothing to do with the issue of Sweden joining NATO. However, Turkey capitalized on Sweden's interest in joining NATO to get something from Sweden that it knew it probably wouldn't have gotten if there was nothing at stake for Sweden. Turkey is not the only country that took advantage of Sweden's willingness to join NATO. Hungary is another country that did this. Did Sweden make the right decision? Although giving in to Turkey and Hungary's demands might not seem like a big deal for Sweden, it's not as simple as it seems. This is because Sweden showed a great deal of desperation. This show of desperation might be a one-time thing, however, it could be a lot worse. You see, Sweden agreeing to Turkey and Hungary's terms and conditions because it is trying to avoid getting attacked by Russia might be a case of choosing the lesser of two evils. Sweden might never get attacked by Russia, so it might not need to defend itself at any point. However, becoming a member of NATO means it has to support the war in Ukraine with arms and maybe funds. It is giving a lot more than it is taking, and agreeing to certain crazy conditions to join a group that it might never need a favor from is just not good. Sweden might have succeeded in shooting itself in the foot. How has NATO shown weakness? Sweden's decision to agree to the terms and conditions put before it by Hungary and Turkey is quite a show of weakness. But if you think only Sweden is affected, you just might be wrong. NATO, too, is affected. This might be difficult to notice, but do you know that Turkey's action has just shown the world that NATO isn't united? This is a big challenge. However, it is not the only challenge. There's also the challenge of NATO not being able to make important decisions quickly just because of the selfish interests of some member countries. In the case of Sweden, waiting almost 2 years to join NATO because certain parties did not give their approval, things didn't look as bad as they were because nothing much was at stake. At this point, you might want to excuse NATO by assuming that something like this will not happen when a lot is at stake. But this is only an assumption. NATO might take a long time to respond to a threat to a member country just because a couple of members do not think a response is appropriate. Well, when they finally respond, if they would, a significant level of harm might have been done. There is one more challenge. Since there is already a show of disunity in NATO, there is a possibility of NATO's enemies manipulating this body's decision. This is probably very unlikely. However, if any member country has something to gain by going against the flow of the other countries, an enemy nation can use this as a loophole. When NATO was formed in 1949, it was only open to countries that had a common interest. With this, it was very powerful, could make important decisions easily, and could forge ahead without anyone being left behind. Well, it has gone through a great deal of expansion, and as good as this might be, it has weakened this group in the same way it has made it powerful. Lots of member countries no longer have the same interests, or are more different than they are similar. This might not seem like much, however, when push comes to shove, it might turn out to be a much bigger weakness than anticipated. This is where we draw the curtains today. Thanks for staying with us all the way. See you in the next video.